In the first semester of teacher Cosby Hunt's real-world history course, these Washington, D.C. high school students focused on analyzing primary and secondary sources.
Do you think that this picture...
In the second half of the school year, they took on internships at historic sites around Washington, D.C., connecting with historians and getting to experience how they do their work.
So the idea is to get people out of the textbook and into the world of what historians actually do, what people in museum studies actually do, what curators actually do.
I think you'd be doing everything.
Nakia Robinson is interning at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Jay Matthews is at Congressional Cemetery. Patricia Salvador is at President Lincoln's Cottage. And Zawadi Carroll is working at the White House Historical Association, just a block from the White House, in a house originally built by U.S. Navy hero Stephen Decatur in 1818. Decatur lived there for just 14 months before he was killed in a duel. Since 2010, Decatur House has been home base for the White House Historical Association.
In real-world history, we learned about the significance of primary sources and all that we can extract from a primary source. So here I was interning inside a primary source, which was the Decatur House, most notably the slave quarters. So now I'm going to lead you all to the slave quarters, as Jake just talked about. So we're going to... Real-world history gave me an approach to these things that I guess I wouldn't have known before, just questions to ask about them and what to take from them. And if you look around, can you tell what you might think was here as part of the original slave quarters and what was like an addition later?
Fireplace, these, all the
Yeah.
flooring.
I wanted to learn more about the place and also just what the Historical Association did for not just the White House, but what it did in preserving the history of D.C.
Our mission is to help students thinking critically and also viewing multiple perspectives and learning that history can be fun. So I know that I'm doing my job if I can inspire students to be more passionate about history.
So we're putting this in order, and this is Paths to Freedom.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
During her internship, Zawadi has tried to learn as much as she can about the enslaved men and women who lived in Decatur House. Today, she's giving a tour of their living quarters for the first time.
This is one of the few existing urban slave quarters we have, especially in this close proximity to the White House. And so it tells us a lot about what life was like there, especially for what we call urban slavery and what the life was like for enslaved men and women here.
She has had an opportunity to observe many tours from our part-time educators, and she's also read a lot of history and background about the house, and we've given her a lot of primary sources and resources for her to look through and kind of interpret on her own.
So urban slavery was a little bit different, or very different than plantation slavery, which is what we know most popularly. So as we know, Washington, D.C. had a lot of free African Americans, so the enslaved persons here would have been interacting actually with those people as well, going out into the market, buying things, and then coming back here. So we estimate it's about 4 people in a room sleeping, and then downstairs in what is now in the gift shop would have been places to do laundry, to eat. There would have been a kitchen.
So at the beginning of the Civil War in 1861, there was still slavery in Washington, D.C. within view of the White House, and Abraham Lincoln certainly would have run into many enslaved men and women while he lived here. I think it's really powerful to imagine slavery existing in President Lincoln's neighborhood, in his backyard.
On April 16, 1862, Lincoln ended slavery in Washington, D.C., well before he issued the Emancipation Proclamation.
And what was unique about D.C. emancipation was that it was compensated. So anyone that owned slaves could give a description of their slaves, what they did for them, how much they brought into the family, and they could be paid for, I guess, what was seen as work loss. So we see an inventory there. I know that being African American, my ancestors were probably enslaved, but I don't know the full history of that. So also part of my family has been in Washington, D.C. for a pretty long time, so learning more about that history did make it a little bit of an emotional connection that I was happy to have.
Zawadi, I noticed that you used the language enslaved men and women instead of the word slave. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So yes, if you notice throughout the tour, I've been using the word enslaved men and women or enslaved people rather than slaves. It's just a more humanizing term that we use to say that these were people. They weren't just slaves or property, because a slave is property and there are stories associated with them. It's more than just studying history, being in the slave quarters, knowing that people actually slept here. This is where they, you think about things that they would have thought of as an enslaved African American, like what it felt like to be in that condition, and you're in the place where they actually were enslaved. So it means a lot, and it made it more than just history, like you said. It made it like, I guess this is a part of, as an African American, this is a part of my existence in America before I was here.
In the fall, Zawadi will start school at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. And while she's thinking about majoring in computer science, her year in real-world history has made a big impression.
I do want to do maybe a humanities or history-based minor. I really enjoy learning about history from a very humanizing perspective, which is how they do it here at the Decatur House, and giving different stories of different people and just different perspectives and a new approach to history has definitely made me more interested in possibly doing something like that in the future. So this concludes our tour of the Decatur House. Thank you all so much for coming and being a great audience.
Zawadi has a vision for her future. I think she has maybe one of the strongest interests in the things that we've studied. I think she has I won't call her a geek. She's a very cool kid.
About this home and the quarters, so I'll lead you guys back downstairs now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Good job.